Hello, my name is Felicity Welch, and I'll be highlighting the impacts of the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill. The purpose of this presentation is to understand the factors which led to the Exxon Valdez oil spill, learn of the lasting contamination of Prince William Sound, to be referred as PWS henceforth, beaches, and discuss the ecological consequences of the oil spill. I will begin by reviewing the context of this oil spill, especially in comparison to other historic oil spills, as well as understanding the scope of the impacted areas. It is then important to understand the long-lasting impacts of the oil spill, reviewing the rate and magnitude of the oil which remains in the affected area. Lastly, I will discuss the significance of the ecological impact of the spill and how this one occasion has left a lasting impact on the biodiversity of PWS. The Exxon Valdez oil spill was a man-made disaster that occurred when Exxon Valdez, an oil tanker owned by the Exxon Shipping Company, spilled 11 million gallons of crude oil into Alaska Prince William Sound on March 24, 1989. The Exxon Valdez was carrying roughly 54 million gallons of oil from the Trans-Alaska Terminal, and upon collision with the Bly Reef, 8 out of the 11 cargo holds were ruptured. The probable causes of the incident were attributed to the failure of a third mate to properly maneuver the vessel, probably due to fatigue or excessive workload. Also attributed to the failure of the master to provide a proper navigation watch, also impaired from alcohol. Also attributed to the failure of the Exxon Shipping Company to supervise the master and provide a rested and sufficient crew for the Exxon Valdez, as well as attributed to the failure of the U.S. Coast Guard to provide an effective vessel traffic system and the lack of effective pilot and escort resources. As I mentioned, there is an element of negligence, as the captain took a plea deal due to the fact that he was intoxicated at the time of the collision, and he had left his post to a lower ranking officer who had been on duty for longer than his scheduled shift. In an attempt to clean up the oil spill, chemical dispersant, a surfactant, and a solvent mixture was applied to the slick oil spill by a private company on March 24th with a helicopter, but the helicopter missed the target area. Therefore, the landowners, fishing groups, and even conservation groups questioned the use of these chemicals on these 100 miles of shorelines when there were other alternatives that might be available. So on this day, mechanical cleanup was started shortly after the missed attempt by the helicopter using booms and skimmers. But unfortunately, the skimmers were not readily available during the first 24 hours following the spill, and the thick oil and kelp of the area tended to clog the equipment. And because Prince William Sound contained many rocky coves where the oil was collected, the decision was made to displace it with high pressure hot water, as you see in this photo. However, this also displaced and destroyed the microbial populations of the shoreline, also causing its own biodiversity impacts. When comparing this oil spill to other major events in history, the amount of oil spilled ranks low on the list. As you see, the highest amount of oil spilled was in the Persian Gulf oil spill in 1991, which spilled roughly between 380 to 520 gallons of oil. However, this is known still as the Exxon Valdez oil spill was still known as the worst oil spill in U.S. history until the Deepwater Horizon spill in 2010. Of the roughly 9,000 miles of the shoreline of PWS in the spill region, roughly 15% or 1,300 miles of the 9,000 miles were impacted by oil. Of this 13,000, 15% or 200 miles were heavily moderately oiled, while 1,100 miles were lightly or very lightly oiled. 10 beaches were randomly selected from 42 PWS beaches that had a subsurface oil in 2001. These sites were also followed up in 2005, and as you see, there was major discrepancies in how the oil moved around during that 1 year or during that 4-year period. One beach, as you see, it's site 3, had only a trace of oil in 2001, but still had light residues found in 2005. This highlights not only the continuous presence of oil, but the migration and recontamination of PWS beaches over time. When we start looking at the annualized loss rates of subsurface oil, it's looking to see how much oil was removed during this time period. The high annual rate of subsurface oil loss from the beaches in PWS started at 68% that year from 1991 to 1992, and this initially implied that remaining subsurface oil was assumed to soon reduce to negligible amounts. However, by 2001, there was still roughly 100 tons of oil remaining on the beaches within PWS. It was mostly buried within the uppermost half meter of the soil. And during this time, they saw only a loss of 20% of the oil that remained during this period. And like I mentioned, the declining oil loss rates were attributed mainly to the geomorphological variation between the beaches, as there is a surface layer of boulders on these beaches, which often protects the underlying sediments from physical dispersion, thus providing the stability needed for the oil to stay around. And even now, nearly 30 years later, there's still pockets of crude oil that remain in some of these locations. This infographic describes the ecological impact of the oil spill. The impact on the biodiversity in this area is what makes this spill distinct from many other spills. This event had a catastrophic impact on wildlife and the environment, killing hundreds of thousands of seabirds, otters, seals, and whales. As you can see, there are some species which have still not been recovered to today. This includes the herring, killing whale, and pigeon guillemots. In summary, the Exxon Valdez oil spill accumulated 11 million gallons of crude oil in the Alaskan Prince William Sound on March 24, 1989, including the ecological impacts and the upsetting of the biodiversity in the area. It's considered the worst oil spill in US history until the Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. This Exxon Valdez oil slick covered 1,300 miles of coastline and killed hundreds of thousands of seabirds, otters, seals, and whales. Nearly 30 years later, pockets of crude oil remain in some locations, as well as we've seen the impact to the biodiversity still withstands. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the impact of this oil spill and its continuous impact on the biodiversity of the PWS area. Please visit the listed references for more information. Thank you.